Welcome to Elder Tales. I'm Dr. Andrew Corrin, your host, and this is another story from my collection of short stories, This Old Stick. Sometimes in life, the most beautiful and precious moments are juxtaposed with the most troubling. This was the experience for the family of a dying man visited by their doctor. I hope you can listen with compassion and delight to the story that is called Complaint.
Dr. Adrian Fisk, I am writing this letter on behalf of my sister Susan and myself to express our disappointment with your conduct when you visited our father last week. Adrian wearily places the handwritten page back on his desk amidst the jumble of the day's end. Lab results needing an urgent phone call to Mrs. Timmins for an adjustment to her blood pressure medication. A pile of specialist letters telling him to do things that they really should have arranged themselves, having already extracted a handsome fee from their plush private rooms. The insurance medical report for yet another contested claim. And the list of phone messages from patients who were unable to get an appointment but who insist on same-day service from their doctor. I just won't see anyone else, Dr. Fisk. He tries to bury the complaint letter and get on with the jumble, but its critical tone keeps beating inside the bell of his head with a clanging he cannot ignore. He sighs to the empty room as he unfolds the sharply creased page. Here we go. How did I get it wrong this time? As you will appreciate, we have found Dad's passing difficult on many levels, and we feel the need to communicate to you our concerns so as to help you improve your behavior around dying patients. You were inappropriately jocular with Dad and inconsiderate of him and Mum when they were facing the most traumatic event of their lives. Adrian stands up suddenly and turns to face his mirror. Are you fricking kidding me? The face staring back at him answers silently with an exasperated expression. An extra layer of thick skin is a critical piece of equipment in a GP's kit bag. Everyone is an expert nowadays, and that leaves the GP, the jack of all trades, master of none, to be everyone else's whipping boy. Adrian watches as the corners of his almost imprisoned downturned lips quiver and hint at escape. Jack would have had a laugh at the concept of a whipping boy. Everyone needs someone to take a flogging for them, even if we don't have blue blood. Adrian can hear him chortle between gasps. Of course your blood is as blue as it comes, Jack, Adrian would have replied. You don't get to be a star emphysema patient without some blue ribbon. Pink puffers and blue bloaters, the two types of emphysema patients Adrian remembered from medical school, both distressing in their end stage, unable to get enough precious oxygen into their lungs. But not Jack. Struggling, yes. Distressed, no. He had refused to let his failing body assault his resilient sense of humour. Adrian remembered when he first met Jack and his petite, quiet wife Sonia. They had just moved to town from Wellington and were looking for a new GP. Adrian's patient load was already too full, and he was preparing to deliver the refrain that had become familiar over the past few exhausting months. I'm sorry, but my books are closed. I have more patients than I can reasonably take care of. You'll be better cared for by one of my colleagues. Of course, it was never the response new patients wanted, as they felt they were the most important people in the practice and deserved the full attention of their choice of doctor, virtually on demand. Adrian catches himself sighing again. He's been doing that a lot lately, and reminds himself that not all patients are so draining. The few, like Jack, keep him in the job, but they are the exception, and losing Jack has been hard on Adrian as well. That first meeting with Jack and Sonia elicited Adrian's closely guarded acceptance speech. I am very happy to take you on as patients, but I need you to be aware that appointments with me are hard to get at short notice. Jack and Sonia had walked into Adrian's consulting room holding hands. That was the first sign that he wanted to take them on. Jack was puffing away, but grinning and refusing help with his oxygen cylinder. That was another sign. The couple spoke of making a fresh start for the next phase of their lives, away from squabbling children and in the temperate climate of the Bay of Plenty. A third sign: loving, resilient relationship, humour and independence in the face of struggle, and a positive, proactive perspective. These were the deeply functional attributes Adrian valued in people, and that he wished he had more of himself. Perhaps some of that will rub off on me if I spend time with Jack and Sonia, he remembered thinking during that first meeting as he glanced at his hand for the imprint from Jack's overly enthusiastic handshake. Looking into the mirror was becoming a ritual in Adrian's day. "You need to know yourself better, Adrian," his counsellor had told him. That simple line became a mantra, and Adrian quite enjoyed speaking to himself in the second person. The counsellor was right, of course. 22 years in the job, 22 years of hearing people's complaints and giving out advice, treatment and care. Always giving, often in distressing circumstances, and not without cost. His wife, his children, their families, they had all grown up and moved on. They had always been given the dregs of Adrian at the end of the day, tired, grumpy, glass in hand. So now he takes time to know the guy in the mirror, recognize the danger signs, and do something for himself, something that is functional and healing, not the distraction of whiskey. Adrian used to enjoy the slow and almost sacramental ritual of selecting and drinking a glass of single malt. First, he'd take account of his mood. Highland if he was feeling bright, Isla if he was feeling darker, and Speyside if he needed stimulation. The pour into the dedicated tulip glass was followed by an examination of the colour and oiliness around the glass. Nosing came next. That was his favourite part, lifting the layers of toffee, fruit, sea spray, smoke, vanilla, honey, licorice, mint, hazelnut. Releasing them sometimes by adding a drop of water, his eyes would close, his nose gently lift, and he would be transported to the lochs and burns of Scotland. Then came the tasting, often surprisingly different to what his brain was expecting after the pleasing and teasing play of intoxicating aromas. Flavours in delicate balance, taking ordered turns on the tongue to express their carefully distilled qualities, leaving a lingering finish to caress long after the sip had been swallowed. But in the past few years, Adrian's drinking ritual had become a habit. A rush to swallow the amber liquid, usually an overly generous pour and more than one, seeking the transport of the alcohol rather than the flavours. Transported to irritability and poor sleep, dysfunctional and damaged. That was a word the counsellor used, damaged. Adrian hadn't realised it before, but perhaps his new ritual of looking into the mirror was exchanging one glass for another. His bag of tools now included some things for himself, not just the thick skin. In fact, the counsellor had told him, "Your need to protect yourself emotionally by being thick-skinned must be balanced by the opposite. You need to be vulnerable and prepared to recognize your own feelings." It hadn't been an easy process, but slowly and with a few stumbles, Adrian had managed to give up the whiskey, start kayak fishing, grow kiwi fruit, and get back to his vinyl record collection. Someone had once told him that listening to loud music releases the same endorphins in the brain as sex does. Sex had been off the agenda for quite a while since his wife had left. As he looks into the mirror, Adrian feels he's no longer looking back at, but somehow looking through himself. He recalls the visit to Jack and Sonia's home last Tuesday. She had rung to say that the hospice nurse was there and didn't think Jack would last the next 24 hours. Adrian went to see them in his lunch break and farewell Jack. Besides, it made it much easier for the death certificate paperwork if the doctor had seen the patient soon before death. Sonia had been even quieter and more reserved than usual when she answered the door. "Oh, we so appreciate you coming, Adrian," she had said, with eyes expressing much more than grief allowed her to say. Adrian held her hand and then her tiny body for a few moments before he followed her to Jack's bedroom. The couple's 2 daughters were there, busy with folding ironing and polishing silver photo frames. Jack pushed himself up from his bed with his nicotine-stained, translucent hands as he pulled shallow, rasping breaths from the oxygen-rich tube in his nose. Let's talk about which one of my whiskies you are going to take when I die. In a semi-reclined position, he spoke through a grimace to Adrian, who knew the grimace was hiding a smile, constrained by exhaustion and fear. Dad, it's the doctor, and he doesn't want to hear you talking nonsense. You must save your breath. Adrian was introduced by Sonia to Jenny, the eldest daughter from Lower Hutt, who had apparently left her busy legal practice to polish her parents' silver in the corner armchair. She reluctantly looked up from her blackened cloth to nod at Adrian with suspicious eyes over half-moon spectacles, then went back to attacking the stubborn tarnish on a frame around a photo of Jack and Sonia's grandchildren. Sonia moved to Susan. And this is Susan, who drove up from Topo last week. Adrian smiled in recognition at her. Yes, I think we spoke last week when I arranged the morphine prescription. Susan had started to negotiate her way around the pile of washing to shake his hand, but a glance at Jenny's frown had arrested the move. She hastily picked up a towel from the end of the bed and, with a wilted smile at the doctor, returned to her task. The gathered family members were clearly familiar with silence. The only sound was Jack's tortured and rasping breathing.
In different circumstances, Adrian knew that Jack's usual bonhomie would have resolved the awkwardness, but now all his failing energy was consumed by the work of trying to coax ephemeral breath into his resistant lungs. Adrian had felt like the token guest at a party, invited but unwelcome. He wasn't enjoying the visit and needed to leave, but this would probably be his last conversation with Jack. He mentally ticked off the mandatory questions he would need to answer on the death certificate as he placed his stethoscope on Jack's chest. The act of fitting the earpieces and concentrating on the cacophony of sounds in Jack's chest had a therapeutic impact on those watching and was a welcome connection between doctor and patient. Adrian removed the stethoscope and placed a hand on Jack's chest. With a wry smile, he said to the old man, "How are you going to be disposed of? If we cremate you with this pacemaker still in, you'll go out with an impressive bang." Jack's eyes suddenly watered and opened wide as his pale, bony hand grasped Adrian's arm. "Do you think you can arrange that?" Adrian's focus was so intently on Jack's struggle to speak and chuckle that he didn't hear the sharp intake of breath from the chair in the corner. "No promises, my friend," Adrian had replied as he got up to leave. Jack's hand was still on his arm as Adrian turned to say to Sonia, "Anything you need, let me know. You have my phone number." He sensed Jack's grip slightly tighten, and he turned back to face the eyes that were wet still. Jack's hand lifted and opened, trembling but inviting. Adrian clasped it with both his hands and smiled with reflected tears. The grip was so much weaker than the first time, but no less intense. Alone in his office, Adrian's focus comes back, blinking through fresh tears at his own face in the mirror, less strained somehow, despite the firmly clasped complaint letter in his hand.